بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد.
واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Oh Allah, open up my heart and my mind to receive the information that I'm about to learn, and ease my affairs, and untie the knots in my tongue so that they may understand what I'm about to say. Rabbi arini al-haqqa haqqan fa'attaba'ah. Oh Allah, let me see the truth as a truth so that I may follow it. Wal-batila batilan fa'ajtanibah. And falsehood is falsehood so that I may avoid it. وَلَا تَجْعَلْهُ مُتَشَابِهًا عَلَيَّ فَأَتَّبِعْ هَوَايَ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. And don't let there be a confusion between the two, lest I follow my whims without even realizing it. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. صل على محمد وآل. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the chapter of Al-Isra, chapter 17, verse 88, قل لئن اجتمعت الإنس والجن على أن يأتوا بمثل هذا القرآن لا يأتون بمثله ولو كان بعضهم لبعض ظهيرا. Say that if the nations of genies and of mankind were to come together and support each other to come up with a Quran such as this one, surely they would not be able to do so. And again, Allah emphasizes, even if they were to back each other up. صدق الله العلي العظيم. آمنا بالله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته جميعا. We've reached a point now where we have reached the fifth criterion, and we mentioned that in order to prove that a message is truly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that there are 5 criteria to prove that a message is from God. So you don't just accept any message that someone brings to you claiming that it is from God. So you have to obviously investigate and find out. We said that there are basically 3 religions that claim that they have the message of God. And we said specifically the Jews have the Torah, the Christians have the Bible, and the Muslims have the Holy Quran. The 5 criteria that we said that we were going to basically take these 3 books and we're going to say, okay, well, which one passes each of these criteria? And the one that passes all of them, then we can say safely that this is most definitely the book of God, right? So far we were able to determine based on the first 2 criteria that the Torah and the Bible are out of the running, right? And we were left with the Holy Quran. It passed the first criterion, the second criterion, the third, and the fourth. So what are the criteria that we were mentioning? The first 2 we said were dependent upon Allah's most important characteristic, and that is that He is unlimited, right? We said since He's unlimited, He doesn't have a beginning, doesn't have an end. That means He's constant, He's unchanged, He always existed, will always exist. Therefore, His message must be a reflection of His unlimited nature, meaning that the message must also be constant, just as He is and unchanged over time. We said the Torah, the original Torah, we don't have. It's lost. We said even Jews take the Old Testament as the Jewish Bible. They call it the Jewish Bible. So really that means it's not constant, it's lost. Then we said the Bible, we don't have the original Bible. The Bible we have in our hands today was written 100 to 1300 years after the death of Jesus, or the raising of Jesus, as we Muslims believe, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we said then that means that the Bible doesn't pass that first criterion as well. However, the Quran from 1400 years ago till this day, if you compare a copy, an Arabic copy, an original Arabic copy, because even the Bible that we have today isn't even in the original Aramaic, right? We have the Vulgata and the Septuagint, right? And these are in Greek and in Latin. Every other version after that are actually a translation or some version of that, okay? The Quran, however, we have in the original Arabic, right? So every Quran that you see is basically the Arabic version of the Holy Quran that we had from when it was revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam until this very day. So whether you're in China or you're in Africa or you're in Australia or you're in, the Arctic Circle, North America or South America, Greenland or Iceland, doesn't matter. The Arabic Quran will always be exactly the same wherever you go. Whether it's 1400 years ago, 800, 400, 300, 200, 100, or to this very day, right? And we said there may be differences in the font that's used, But as for the order of the chapters, the order of the verses within the chapters, the short vowels that are on there, meaning the harakat, they're all exactly the same. And so we said the Holy Quran passed that criterion. And then we said the second criterion was that it has to be that the message has no contradictions in it, because the Creator is all perfect, right? Since He's unlimited, He has no flaws, therefore He's all perfect. So that means His message must be perfect. It has to be a reflection of His perfection, which means it can't have any contradictions or mistakes in it. We found, obviously, that there was a contradiction in the Old Testament, or the Jewish Bible, as they call it. And we found that it contradicts also, the Old Testament contradicts as well with the New Testament. And specifically, we looked at Genesis chapter 7, verse 1, contradicting with Genesis chapter 9, verses 20 to 25. And we found that those verses 20 to 25 also contradict with Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1, chapter 23, verse 20, chapter 23, verse 32, right? And in the New Testament, it also contradicts with Luke chapter 1, verse 15. Okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala So neither the Torah nor the Bible passed the second criterion. It was only the Holy Quran that passed the second criterion. We said that anyone who claimed that there's any sort of contradiction in the Holy Quran has been refuted, because what was found is whatever was taken as a claim was specifically taken out of context. Then we moved on to criterion 3. We said that the third criterion is that the message has to refute false claims made by scholars of past religions or by atheists and the like. And so we took 4 false claims: that Noah was drunk, as was in the Old Testament, wal-'ayadhu billah, that Ezra is the son of God, that Jesus is the son of God and is God, and that Jesus was crucified. We refuted all 4 using the Holy Quran. Those who are interested, go back to the lecture that we covered, not yesterday, but the day before that. And then, so that was the third criterion. The fourth criterion, we said that it has to be that the message itself has to have information about the universe that no one else would know except for the Creator Himself. And so we looked into the Holy Quran, and we found, that the information about the earth being swaddled in the chapter of An-Naba, chapter 78, verse 6. We found the chapter about the mountains being like stakes in the earth, and that was chapter 78, verse 7. And then we moved on and we looked at mountains again in the chapter of An-Naml, and we found out that the Quran even mentions the movement of the tectonic plates. وَتَرَى الْجِبَالَ تَحْسَبُهَا جَامِدَةً وَهِيَ تَمُرُّ مَرَّ السَّحَابِ in the chapter of An-Naml, verse 88. And then we moved on and we looked at the earth, the fact that Galileo discovered that the earth was spherical, and Copernicus and Sir Walter Gilbert, all in around between 1532 and the late 1600s. We found then that these individuals were incarcerated and killed for heresy, because they discovered that the earth not only is spherical, but that it has a magnetosphere, and Copernicus discovering that the earth rotates around itself, around the central axis. Rabbul Mashriqayn wa Rabbul Maghribayn in the chapter of Ar-Rahman, we covered the Lord of the 2 sunrises and 2 sunsets. We said that that's proof that the earth actually rotates around an axis. We moved on, of course. We went all the way to proving space travel and air travel, right? That it was in the Holy Quran. يا معشر الجن والإنس إن استطعتم أن تنفذوا من أقطار السماوات والأرض فانفذوا لا تنفذون إلا بسلطان. You can go back to that, right? O nations of jinn and men, if you want to leave the realms of the earth and the skies, then do so. You won't do so without my authority. You have to follow and understand the laws of nature, right? And the physical laws of nature in order for you to understand how to actually utilize them to be able to fly, right? Or to go into outer space. So, and we mentioned the Wright brothers and Yuri Gagarin in 1961, who ended up, being the first cosmonaut to circle around the earth, right? Today, inshallah, our goal is to look at the fifth criterion, and that the message has to be a miraculous one. Message has to be supernatural, because the Creator is beyond nature, meaning super, right? Natural, above nature. So His message also has to be miraculous and above nature. Now we know that Moses, alayhi salam, the prophet of Allah, who came to basically the Israelites, that when he came with a miracle, right? And that the miracle that he brought was basically in the time of sorcery and magic, that he had to speak to the people in that language in order for him to be able to win over everyone. It was in the time of Pharaoh. And so for him, it was the challenge that Allah told him to pose, which was to throw the staff. It would turn into a snake. And then the high priest would, their staffs or their snakes would basically turn into ropes. And then they would all bow down to the Lord of Musa alayhi salam. We also know that Prophet Musa parted the sea, right? So there's a lot of miracles that he did, all with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course. And that's basically what made his prophethood acceptable to these people, because there had to be some sort of supernatural manifestation to prove that he is truly sent by Allah, who is beyond nature, right? So he had to have powers that were beyond nature with the permission of the Creator himself. We find the same occurred with Prophet Jesus alayhi salam. But he came during the time of medicine, right? And so when he came, Allah gave him the ability to return eyesight to the blind, to bring health back to the sick, to cure the lepers, right? To bring the dead back to life. Now, what about for Islam? What about the Holy Quran? And what's interesting is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when it comes to the Holy Quran, He basically brings His book to a group of people who are very heavily isolated from the rest of the world, because of the way the Arabian Peninsula is built with the no man's land, the desert. It's very hard to be able to break into that area. There is no other prophet other than Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam truly that was able to have such an impact and effect on the Arabs of Arabia, like Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and like the words of the Holy Quran. And the reason why is because, you see, Arabs were poets at the time. They were very eloquent in their speech, and because they were poets because they lived in a very arid environment, right? They lived in the desert. They didn't have a centralized government like other civilizations. They would basically gain their bounties through war, through attacking other tribes, as well as through business. So they would basically have trade caravans that would go down to Mecca, and they would have trade there, So this was a very tough area to break into. It wasn't an easy area. Also, this area had people who had come from Jerusalem and from Rome, because they were expecting the coming of a prophet at the time. And we'll talk about, a group known as Nasara Najran, inshallah, tomorrow as well, and how they ended up getting there. But now, the Holy Quran itself comes to a people who are very eloquent in Arabic, and Arabic is a very beautiful language, can be very floral as well, extremely artistic and creative language. And every year, the Arabs would get together during Hajj time, during the pilgrimage time, and they'd basically have a poetry slam. So all the best rappers from every single tribe, the best rapper from each tribe, would be invited to represent their tribe, okay, and basically drop some words on everyone, all right? And what we find is that the challenge that is posed by the Holy Quran is, can you come up with something better than these words? So really, it's exactly like, for example, a rapper who gets up traditionally, old school rappers, they'd get up in a poetry slam or a rap competition, they'd say A to the B to the C, and then they take these words that are made out of these letters, and when they're done spitting some lyrics or some words, they drop the mic, right? Okay, and everybody would say, "Wow, those heavy words, man, heavy words," right? Am I right or am I wrong? Right? So basically, these Arabs, they would send their top poets, their top rappers, and then they'd have a poetry competition, and whoever would win would gain the rights of having, and the great honor and privilege of having verses of their poetry hung on the side of the Kaaba, on the curtain of the Kaaba, and they would be called al-mu'allaqat, right? The hung verses. The reason why they were hung is because of the very fact that these were the winningest verses. That was the poem that actually won the competition, and that tribe would have the honor for that year of having their verses from their top rapper, mu'allaqa, up there on the curtains of the Kaaba, right? So that means that in order to be able to, kind of prove to these individuals that this message is a miracle, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used their own reigning field of expertise. So what He did was, He basically sent words of the Holy Quran, right? That he sent, of course, we'll talk about prophethood tomorrow, inshallah. But he sent the words of the Holy Quran and he challenged them. And the first challenge was what we mentioned in chapter 17, verse 88, in which he said, يا معشر الجن والإنس إن استطعتم عفوا where he says قل لئن اجتمعت الإنس والجن على أن يأتوا بمثل هذا القرآن لا يأتون بمثله ولو كان بعضهم لبعض ظهيرا. That the first challenge was come up with a whole Quran like it. Surely if men and jinn were to get together and help each other and support each other to come up with a Quran such as this, they would not be able to. And surely enough, they failed. The Arabs failed. The best of their poets failed. And I'll give you an example. There's a man by the name of Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira. He was known as being the top poet. Every year his verses would be hung on the Kaaba. Okay? So Abu Jahl, he sends him. Abu Jahl is one of the uncles of Prophet Muhammad, but he was an evil man. He hated the Holy Prophet. So he would send Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, him and Abu Sufyan, another enemy of the Holy Prophet at the time, who just so happens to be the father of Muawiyah, right, and the grandfather of Yazid, la'natullahi alayhima, and the grandfather of Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad as well, and Ziyad ibn Abi, who was the illegitimate son of Abu Sufyan. So at that time, they sent Al-Walid ibn Mughira, they said, go and see what this man is saying, referring to Prophet Muhammad, and bring us back some dirt. So he goes, he comes back, and he looks dumbfounded and bewildered, right? And they said, well, what did you find out? He said, Wallahi ma huwa bi kalami bashar. I swear these are not the words of a human being, right? He says its heights are loftier than the great highest of mountains and peaks. He says its depths are deeper than the deepest of oceans. Its colors are more beautiful than the brightest of rainbows, right? I swear these are not the words of a human being. They said, well, help us out, give us something, right? Give me something negative. He said, I don't know. إِنَّهُ لَسِحْرٌ يُؤْثَرُ. Maybe it's magic, right? So they couldn't come up with a book like it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He poses another challenge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very kind, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then tells them bring me 10 chapters like it, 10 chapters. And in the chapter of Hud, chapter 11, verse 13, right? He tells them, he says, أَمْ يَقُولُونَ افْتَرَاهُ. Or do they say that this prophet made up these words, right? قُلْ. He commands the prophet. He says, say to them, قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِعَشْرِ سُوَرٍ مِثْلِهِ مُفْتَرَيَاتٍ وَادْعُوا مَنْ اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. So, or do they claim that he made up these words? All right, if you claim he made up these words, then why don't you come up with 10 chapters? You weren't able to come up with a whole book? Come with 10 chapters, okay? And then call your people, your posse, right? And let's have a poetry slam, rap competition. Let's see who wins. So again, they fail. They weren't able to come up with anything like it. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges them in the chapter of Yunus, in chapter 10, verse 38. It says that Allah challenged them by saying, okay, you couldn't come up with a whole book. You can come up with 10 chapters. Come up with one chapter. أَمْ يَقُولُونَ افْتَرَاهُ. Or do they say that he made these words up? قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا مَنْ اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Then come up with one chapter like it. One. Right? Let's see, one. Can you do one? Right? And then call your people as well, your posse, your boys, right? And let's have a poetry slam and let's see who wins. They fail a third time. So what do they have now against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What they have against him, the best they could do is they could accuse him of being a poet. But the problem is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't known to be a poet. So whenever there would be like poetry slams or yearly competitions during Hajj season, you know, he wasn't there to do any competition. He wasn't known as a poet. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions this in the Holy Quran in the chapter of Yasin. Very common chapter that we hear and we recite. Chapter 36, verse 69. Right? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says? He says, وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشَّعْرَ وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ. Right? He says, we didn't teach him any poetry, and neither it is for him to learn poetry. So Allah deemed that he should not be learning poetry. Why? Because then people would accuse him of being a poet, and he came up with these words. Right? So then people started to accuse him. Oh, he wrote it. He wrote these words. And he studied under past scholars of past religions, and so that's how he was able to come up with these words. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He responds to them as well. Right? And this time, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he responds in the chapter of Al-Ankabut. Okay? Chapter 29, verse 48. he says, وَمَا كُنْتَ تَتْلُو مِنْ قَبْلِهِ مِنْ كِتَابٍ وَلَا تَخُطُّهُ بِيَمِينِكَ إِذًا لَارْتَابَ الْمُبْطِلُونَ. He said, you neither read a book before it, referring to the books of Allah, the scriptures, because you see, those who read the books of the scriptures, this is a reference more to those who were known to study under scholars of past religions, right? So, for example, Asbagh ibn Nubata was very well known. Buhayra was known, right? We mentioned Buhayra, who was, or Buhayra was a priest. We'll talk about him in a bit, inshallah. When the Prophet ﷺ's grandfather passed away, his uncle was now responsible for him, and he took him up for a trip to Damascus, a business trip. They would stop in an area called Basra, and it was there that this monk by the name of Buhayra, a Christian monk, would see Prophet Muhammad ﷺ walking, and he noticed that there was a cloud over his head, protecting him from the sun. And then he noticed he sat at the tree of prophethood. And then he said, okay, well, I'm going to make a feast just to invite them. When he invites them, he asks to see the Prophet's back. He sees his back, he sees the seal of prophethood. So what their claim is that at that point, when he actually said to his uncle, take him back because he will be targeted. There are a group of people who are waiting for him to come, and if they find out that he's not of their denomination, of their religion, then they will target him and kill him. So he said, take him back down to Mecca. And so he would take him back down. Now that period of time that he invited them, he talked to them, that's what, maybe an hour and a half, say 2 hours, but say 3 hours, say 4 hours. So what's the accusation? Is that they accuse Prophet Muhammad that he learned everything that he knew from Buhayra. Now very simply, we say we can refute this, right? And that's that, well, if Buhayra knew so much, why didn't he claim to be a prophet himself? Number one, right? Number two, what kind of ability does Buhayra have that he could instill all this information in the mind of one human being, within such a short period of time? That just doesn't make any human sense. And then, today, if you put Prophet Muhammad with Buhayra, Prophet Muhammad would know much more than Buhayra would know, right? So then, how could he know more than Buhayra taught? I mean, there are many ways to refute it. But the issue is here, is okay, this accusation that the Prophet ﷺ read a book before it is a false accusation, because he wasn't known to have studied under anyone. He was a shepherd. And then after that, he worked as a businessman with Sayyidah Khadija alayhi salam. He wasn't known for studying any book. Also, وَمَا كُنْتَ تَتْلُو مِنْ قَبْلِهِ مِنْ كِتَابٍ وَلَا تَخُطُّهُ بِيَمِينِكَ. So you weren't known to read a book before it, and you weren't known to even write it as a scribe with your right hand. So scribes at the time were known. People who knew how to read and write at the time usually were known, because this was a big status, especially those who wrote. Most of them were scribes that would either follow the nobility, or they would follow the priests and the rabbis, and usually they'd carry their papers behind them and be like good students, following them around, hanging on every word, writing every word that they would say, right? But the Quran is saying, but you guys never saw this from him, right? إِذَنْ لَارْتَابَ الْمُبْطِلُونَ. Therefore, those who are trying to falsify the claim that this is the book of God and that this is the prophet of God, right, are themselves in a state of doubt. They're not sure if their claim is true anyway, right? إِذَنْ لَارْتَابَ الْمُبْطِلُونَ. So then from here we're able to determine, based on all of these proofs that we talked about then, based on the fact that to this very day no one has been able to come up with a chapter like the Holy Quran. The fact that it's so clearly been encrypted, right, that it's been preserved from 1400 years ago to this very day, tells us then, based on it passing all 5 criteria, that the only book that we can say is legitimately the book of God is the Holy Quran. Agreed? If you agree, say I agree. Okay. So now when we take the Holy Quran, we can say legitimately, now when I take verses from the Holy Quran, for sure, they are the words of God, right? So when I take someone through this journey until I get them to this point, now it becomes easier and clearer for them that truly what we're dealing with now is the book of God. And so, since it's the book of God, and these are the words of God, and God is the unlimited, all-perfect creator, and I seek to please Him, then what am I going to do? I'm going to take His message and dedicate my life to it, to understanding it. Does that make sense? If it makes sense, say it makes sense. Right? I'm going to dedicate myself to it. Now, we said that it's got to be that when I take any course of study, right, in any educational system, what's the first thing that we do, that they do when we go into class? We said they give us a syllabus, a textbook, and a teacher, right? And a teacher. So now what's remaining is to figure out who's the teacher, right? And this is where we come to chapter 2, verse 23 of the Holy Quran, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also poses a challenge to them, and the challenge now is to have this message be delivered by somebody like him, right? And this is what we'll talk about tomorrow, inshallah. We'll start with that verse. We'll, inshallah, talk about prophethood, prove, who the true prophet of God is, and then we'll move on to imamat after that. Bi'awnihi ta'ala, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala sayyidil mursaleen, wal fatiha ala arwah al-marhumin, masbuqatan mashfu'atan salati ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى